2005, and we're in the home of Maxwell Pyenson. Could you start out by talking about when and where you were born, and tell a little bit about your parents? I can do that.
Oh, okay. I was born right here on this farm on 12/30/1916. It was a very, very rural neighborhood at the time, a very, very, I wouldn't know how to describe it, a house that was real crude, wood stove heat, and I was happened to be a 7-month baby, and I guess I'm lucky I made it, but here I am living to 88. So I guess we're fortunate in that sense. My folks came here in about 1904 or 5. My mother came here first and worked in the garment district in New York and saved up enough money to send for my father. This is what I hear anyway. And he came here, I guess, the following year. And they stayed for a while in Brooklyn and were in associated in a candy store, I understand. And that didn't work out. And they got somehow word that the people up here next door to where we live now had a large farm and used to keep boarders. And they needed a farmer, and my father was trained in Russia in agriculture, went to agricultural school there, and was trained in agriculture, so somehow they got acquainted and hooked up that he should come here as a farmer, and my mother came along as a domestic. And they stayed there, I think, for possibly a year or two at the most. And
At the house
at the house next door, which was at that time, like I said, a place where they kept boarders and had a big farm. And they were sort of discouraged with the situation there, the way the employment, and they found out that the place next door here, which is the present farm, was for sale, and they bought it for $800. There are various stories about where they got the money, but I'm not certain where. I know that the Jewish Agricultural Society was involved in lending him money, and also a friend that they had been acquainted with and became very so-called friendly with, who also lent him some money later on to remodel the old house so that they could have more rooms in it, and they went into the rooming business. Invite people up, guests up here in the summertime from New York and Springfield, and they would come up here and spend vacations here with them.
Did they have cottages set up for these people, or did
they had 4 or 5 rooms in the house, and later on there was a cottage with 2 rooms in it that they rented. And of course, my father, in the early part of his time here, I think he worked on before the war. He worked on the town roads here, which was very discouraging toward him being a Jew, And I think during the war.
You mean they didn't treat him very well?
Well, yeah, he was. I mean, the way he was treated, and I think that during the war, he was sent down to Baltimore to work, build army camps down there in the Baltimore area. So he worked there during World War I. Then came back here and said that if he couldn't make a living out of this farm, why, it was no use holding it. So he decided he was going to start in the poultry business, raise some chickens. And he had a barn, and I know that through the years we had raised, had about 4 or 5 cows, and then he started with the cows, I think probably a little later on, but started early in the chicken business, raising young ones for eggs. And I know that there was a time that he raised them in the house, when they were baby chicks, so they'd stay warm and so forth. And I remember we were tearing the house apart and remodeling it, and we still saw signs of litter between the floors, and he gradually used the milk and so forth and butter and cheese that my mother made to sell to the summer people, and of course they sold them the eggs from the farm too, so there was a little extra source of income there. But there came a time when he expanded a little bit heavier, so that he had to find routes around here where to sell his eggs. And through the years, he got acquainted with many friends that used to come up here from Springfield and stay at the house as roomers, and a lot of them owned grocery stores, and in the city in Springfield. So he used to sell them eggs all year round, their grocery stores, and of course through one he became acquainted with several others, and they were all Jewish grocery keepers, and he did business with them for many, many years in Springfield, selling his surplus eggs. We used to go there once a week, and also bring in some butter and cheese and things like that my mother made. So this is how they made a living in the early years. They had grew from 300, 400, 500 chickens. I think the most they ever had in the 30s, in the early 30s or the middle 30s, they had about probably around 4,000, 3,500, 4,000 chickens at the most. And this is how they made a living, and sent three sons through college to the University of Massachusetts. And well, what else can I do?
Yeah, well, let's see. I was wondering, you mentioned the Jewish Agricultural Agency.
Oh, yeah.
Were they the ones, is that the same agency that got that Sandusfield group started? Or do you know?
I'm not certain whether the JAS got into that area or not, but I know there was they worked their finances through one man whose name was Steinberg, who was like a financier to him. He would take chattel mortgages on their chicks, and he would supply them with grain, and of course they would have to pay him back. And he was like a banker. So I know this is where they worked a lot of their finances there and in that area in Sandusfield. Of course, they had many, one time I guess they must have had between all the farmers there, they must have had close to 75 or 100,000 chickens down there.
Yeah.
They used to call it, in fact, it was called Roosterville at one time. Maybe I think on the old maps it still is.
I'm also wondering about, you mentioned that your father had had a background as a farmer in Russia. What did he tell you about that?
He went to agricultural school there. That's all I can tell you. I have a picture here of his class. I have the class picture, and he was trained in some sort of agriculture there in Russia, graduated from that school. And actually what he had learned there, I don't know, but I know it was the rudiments of agriculture that they taught there in Russia. And whether it helped him here or not, of course it couldn't have hindered him. This is what he wanted to do when he came here, to do something in agriculture here. He had the farm, and he had to make it pay for itself.
Yeah. You were talking about how much of his dealing with, when he was selling chicks and eggs, or selling the eggs in particular, was with these Jewish grocers in the city and so on. To what degree did he, or you for that matter, as you were farming the place, have lots of interactions with just other farmers around here, not necessarily Jewish farmers? Was that part of his experience?
Interactions? There were other Jewish farmers in the area, in the immediate area,
yeah.
But none of them raised poultry. There were butchers, Jewish butchers in the area years ago, back in the early 20s, that lived within walking distance of the place here. And there was a dairy farmer that lived about a mile and a half away that ran a dairy farm for many, many years, and the sons grew up and sold milk in a route in Springfield. But he was the only poultryman, anyone who raised chickens within the immediate area.
What about other farmers that were not Jewish around here? Did you trade with them at all?
And when we ran, I remember when we ran short of butter and cream and things like that to take care of our people in the summertime, he would go to, I know another farmer, and buy his cream and butter. So there was an association there of purchasing from other farmers within the neighborhood, and we always got along pretty well with all the other Christian people within our area, very well. I don't know what else I can tell you, except that I was trained in agriculture in college, and
You went to UMass?
UMass. I was trained in poultry and animal husbandry and education within the animal industry. So I had that background, and one of my brothers was trained as an entomologist, and he had his PhD, and he taught at the Long Island Agricultural Technical Institute. And another brother had his PhD from University of Massachusetts. His background was, but they did graduate work, one of them at Cornell and the other one at Penn State. And the second one got his PhD at Penn State, and was in the dairy industry. And he associated for many years as he was progressing with University of Pennsylvania and the University of Wisconsin at Fond du Lac. And then he got a job with the Ready Whip as director of research for ReadyWhip.
He's the one that invented the, and he,
The
I think Steve told me.
yeah, the ReadyWhip aerosol can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he worked for many, many years with ReadyWhip in California, and that's where he lived for many years, and his family is still out there.
Now, I don't have the impression that it doesn't seem to me typical of farm families that, you know, you have 4 sons, they all go off to college, some of them get
3 sons, yeah.
3 sons. So that's pretty, I guess to me that seems like a pretty distinguishing thing about your family.
Well, my mother insisted that I guess that we go away and get an education. And of course it didn't cost, well, relatively speaking, it didn't cost much at that time, but it was a lot of money. Still, that's the same. When the Vernon University at that time cost about $500 a year, which was a lot of money compared to what it is today. So we all happened to get an education, and I got a master's degree, and the others got their PhDs, and I got mine in poultry and animal husbandry, as I said, and education. And I taught school for a while, agriculture, and I was an agricultural extension agent for the Jewish Agricultural Society before the war, which I really enjoyed. And then, of course, I had to go on the service. And after I got out of the service, I says that I'm going home and work for myself, which I did. I went into business with my father for a few years.
And you were able to apply, I guess you were able to apply what you'd learned in school back here. On
And I had, he turned over the farm to me back in the early 50s. And we had a bunch of old buildings here. Buildings were built back in the 30s. And they were not suitably acclimated to this kind of weather, you know. They weren't insulated well and everything else, and it was a struggle. I used to keep probably about 4,500 chickens, and when I took over, filled up everything I can with layers to try to make them productive, and it was just and I tried to sell eggs, have roots around here, and I tried to sell eggs to some of the people that were in the wholesalers that were in the business of purchasing eggs, and it was a tough situation. It was just a struggle, and I also found out that it was a struggle to work the old buildings here because of the severe weather in wintertime. So I endured it until 1960, and I made feelers out, and I borrowed money from the Farmers Home Administration, and I tore down the old farm and started rebuilding. And I put up one big house for 10, 11,000 birds.
So you more or less tripled
the
birds you were keeping.
Yeah. And tripled the amount of birds that I could keep here on the farm. And got acquainted with a individual who was interested in hatching egg production. So I was sort of trained in breeding work and hatching work, and My father had a hatchery here that he ran himself, so we had incubators. And I continued selling some baby chicks on the side and doing all my own hatching and breeding. So I didn't have to go out and buy it, purchase it. And I developed a pretty good strain of what they called a sex-linked cross. The red rooster, Rhode Island red rooster on the Barred Rock female, which produced that cross. And I got acquainted with a hatching egg broker down in Connecticut who wanted all the eggs I could produce for hatching, and I became number one on his sales list for to purchase hatching eggs. And I was selling hatching eggs, or he was selling them for me all over the East Coast. And towards the end, back in the early 70s, I guess, late 60s, the hatching egg business was sort of petering out. They weren't giving me enough money for it. They give me 30 cents above wholesale quotation, which didn't amount to much because it costs a lot more to produce a hatching egg. You had to buy, I bought special males that I raised from somebody else is breeding so that I could constantly improve my stock. And I got to the point where I wasn't getting enough for the hatching eggs. So I think it was in 1968, I told my broker, I said, this is the last. I said, you can't pay me anymore. I said, everybody else is getting at least 90 cents a dozen for the hatching eggs, and I was only getting at the most 70 or 75, and if the market was good, I might get 80. But everybody else was getting at least 90 cents for a dozen for the hatching eggs, and I says, you can't pay me that. I said, I'm getting out of the business. So I did, and I went into the market egg business, which was a struggle all over again to produce, to get into the market here and get a clientele to sell eggs to.
Was this locally?
Yeah, local
clientele.
Local clientele. So I started building up a business of a store here and a store there, and maybe a hospital here or a nursing home there, you know. And that's the way I started building it up. And any surplus I would sell to a wholesaler. And then one of my sons came home from college after being trained in poultry, and he went in business with me, Steve, and he took over the business of going out and marketing the eggs, which he did a good job at, and started getting more and more customers. And then a few years later, another son came, got out of the university and decided to come into business. So I increased, put up another poultry house of another 10, 12,000, and we raised our capacity to 22,000 birds. So to accommodate a few families. And we, in the meantime, we had been developing a local business as a store, selling eggs.
Your own store.
Our own store, selling eggs, dressed poultry, local products such as maple syrup, cheese, things like that. And we expanded on that. And to accommodate, the increase in family, to help make a decent living out of this place. So we gradually increased our clientele in wholesale and retail eggs, and we developed a what you might call a place where I forgot what I would refer to as a known place where you could stop and get fresh eggs and other good products from a store. And we gradually developed a business until we, I guess, came to the realization that we had to start hiring people. So we hired
You mean hiring people outside the family?
outside the family, yeah. My wife would help, and for many years, and then we started hiring a clerk for the store, and hiring an individual to take care of helping grading the eggs, and so forth. And we became a place where, just by word of mouth, that we grew and became a well-known stop for fresh eggs and other fresh farm products. And this is where we are today. I said, and of course then I retired a number of years ago, and I turned the business over to my two sons.
What was the Jewish background? To what level did your parents, for instance, observe Judaism? Yeah, and how did they pass that on to you? Living out here.
We didn't. We never went to synagogue. My father was quite versed in Judaism. But, and I guess probably my mother was too. But being out here and not having a synagogue within walking distance or within relatively few miles, why, we never went to shul, and we never got bar mitzvahed. So even though we were brought up Jewish and we adhered to the Jewish principles and everything else, this was a situation that we had to endure.
So it was something that was taken account of at home.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
In what ways, for instance?
Oh, we observed the holidays, and during holidays like that, we didn't go to school, and we observed. I know my mother used to, for Purim, she'd make hamantashen, and for Hanukkah, she would make other goodies and things like that there, and so this is the way we observed it. Nothing too drastic, but we knew who we were.
Yeah, your son tells me that he's currently getting bar mitzvah training.
Yeah, good luck to him.
Very inspiring, learning Hebrew at his age.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know how much I left out, but...
Well, I think I'm just curious to hear just a little bit more about the early days of the farm, and when you were first growing up. I take it your parents had you out doing chores from a pretty young age?
Oh, yeah.
What kinds of jobs did you
well, we all had to work, naturally. I mean, when you have a farm, everybody has to pitch in and work. And we all learned how to pick up eggs. naturally. We all learned how to shovel manure. We all learned how to clean houses, clean poultry houses, disinfect poultry houses. And of course, the greatest chore, and the one that was sort of liked the most in quotation marks, was shoveling manure. And of course, I grew up and we had 3, 4, 5 cows. And with the cows went more shoveling manure and milking.
Yeah.
Of course, I learned how to milk, not to the greatest extent, but I learned how to milk. And of course, it was cutting hay. We had 35 acres around here, but only about 15 or 20 of it was hay fields. And you had to cut the hay and cure it and bring it into the barn for the cows, which was a big chore. So this is the chores that I grew up with, and some of my brothers did. Of course, they left to go elsewhere a lot earlier than I did. And these are the chores I grew up with. But when I got home from the service and went in business with my father, he still had a cow. And he still had a horse, which we had to feed and shovel the manure from. So I prevailed on him. I says, I don't think we need the horse. I says, maybe we ought to invest in a little tractor. And
so he was keeping the horse for plowing, for
well, yeah, for
garden, or
well, he did. He had 3 or 4 buildings here, poultry house, and sometimes you had to drag some grain from one to the other.
Yeah.
You ran short in one, you take it to the other, or other poultry products you'd have to drag from one house to the other, and you hitch up the horse to do it. And of course, you had to feed the horse and shovel the manure away from him, same the way you did with the cows. So I prevailed with him. I says, now look, the time it takes you to take care of a horse, I says, is sort of wasted as far as I'm concerned. I says, you spend more time with what's more productive. I said, let's get rid of the horse and buy a tractor. So we started with a cut down, an old machine with, and you put 2 transmissions in it. And some guy had one around the area, and we bought it for, I think, a few $100s at that time, and I tinkered with it and fixed it up and put a body on it, and I'd use that to run supplies around to the various buildings. And if you had to maybe carry eggs from we carried eggs from 3 buildings into the main house where the grading machine was. So once in a while you'd go easy and put the eggs on this little, what you call a cut down machine, and bring them into to the main house. So you gradually developed and evolved from one thing to another. And then from this cut down, we needed you got rid of the horse, so you needed a tractor for mowing all the land around here. So we bought first tractor was a Model A International Harvester that we bought for, I think, maybe $1,200-1,300.
Would this been sometime in the 30s?
This was in the early, after I got home from the service.
After the war.
After the war, and
So
machinery.
he kept that horse.
Machinery was scarce, and he being a veteran, they put me on a list and gave me finally gave me some early indication that I could get a tractor. So with the tractor, we got a snowplow. And then eventually we went with his tractor and a snowplow and a mowing machine on the tractor to mow the land. And this is how we went into what you call mechanization, which was a lot easier than taking care of the animals. Of course, then I convinced them to get rid of the cows. I says, you can buy milk, and I says, you hate to milk the cow anyway. I says, let's get rid of the cow, and I says, there's milkmen around here that delivering milk. You can buy milk. And of course, my mother says, well, then they don't make the cheese like I do, and this and that and everything else. I said, well, you'll get used to it. You know, so you started buying butter from some of the milkmen, you started buying their cheese and their milk and everything else, and you got away from diversification, and you went into specialization, into this is it. You're in the egg business, and this is what you're going to specialize in, and this is where you're going to put your energy.
Yeah.
So this is how also it evolved.
Yeah. Did your mother have a rural background too? I mean, I know you said that she made cheese and so on. Had she learned that where she came from, or something?
I'm not sure. I think that she had some sort of a rural background, but I'm not sure. But she knew how to make all these things, how to make butter and cream and cheese and so forth. And I never even questioned it. I mean, this is what you just learn.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but you just learn it. And of course, you probably learn different ways of doing things from the various farmers in the neighborhood. I mean, that you'd come in contact with. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we were finally accepted into this neighborhood with all the Christian farmers. We used to have a sewing circle here, where all the neighbors would get together. The women would get together in the afternoon, and the women would get together and sew. They would sew, I don't know, whatever, blankets and comforters and everything else. And the men would come to this house that was selected for that month to eat in the evening. So we were finally accepted into this sewing circle, and we would go around to the various houses and have supper. Women would come in the afternoon and sew, and we'd also take our turn to have the neighbors come to our house and eat in the evening and have a sewing circle in the afternoon. So
when did that start up?
This was in the 30s.
So okay, so
in the 30s, before the war.
You had been here a couple.
Yeah. Oh, we've been here a long time. Yeah.
Before.
In the we were accepted in the maybe the late 20s and early 30s.
Yeah.
We started to get accepted. I mean, they figured we were expected and so forth. And
what do you think it was that made it possible for them to accept you at that point?
Well, I think they found out that we were relatively honest people and good neighbors, and I think that my mother used to get acquainted with all the farm women around here, and I think we finally got accepted that way. I mean, we didn't interfere with their markets. Mm-hmm. They had the markets in Lee and so forth in the small towns around here, where they would get to take the horse and buggy and maybe an automobile later on and go on to peddle their few dozen eggs and whatever else they had. And they were worried that my father, with his 4,000 birds, would interfere with his market. And he never did.
He had his own market.
He had his own market. He went to Springfield, and they figured that and that score that he wasn't trying to interfere with their business, that probably he was a right guy.
This is great. I really appreciate
Of course, my wife was born in the city, in Brooklyn, and I had met her here in a camp, in a summer camp, before the war, in the late 30s, and then when I went to teach in school and so forth, I used to go to New York to visit her. Then when I was an extension agent in New York State, I used to go down to New York and visit her too. And we became engaged early in the war, and we were married during the war down in south in Blackstone, Virginia. She had didn't realize that I wanted to come back here to the farm after the service, because she thought that I would probably go back doing extension work, but I preferred to come back here after the war, and it was a surprise to her. And we finally, soon after coming here, we had an apartment in my folks' house, and then a couple of years later we built this house that we're living in present time, and raised a family and so forth, 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. And she had helped me all through the years. She taught school for a while also, and
around here.
Around here she was a substitute teacher in the high schools, in Lee, in Stockbridge, Great Barrington. She got to be on the sub list and was called quite often to sub in the high schools. She was English major, and she used to be called on to teach most anything. In fact, even agriculture. even to substitute in the agriculture class. And she used to help me. We did a lot of trucking in the hatching egg business, and she used to do a lot of trucking for me when I had to take them down to the Cheshire, Connecticut, to the wholesaler where he would ship them out from his garage. And we shipped a lot of hatching eggs from the railroad station in Lee at the time. And she took care of the store for many, many years after getting home from school, and teaching, and did that for many years until we were both retired.
So she took all right to farm life.
Yeah. Finally.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So